Chapter 5:12. Don't get distracted. Tianbang reminded her. Zhang looked up in shock and saw the dark clouds above Xia City distort once more. They burst apart. Although the turbulence was great, there was no sound. It was because of this that the pencil-straight long scar that nearly sunk into the horizon suddenly twisted and fell diagonally downwards. They were still fighting. Zhang looked up at the strange scene in the sky and was delighted at first. She felt that the live broadcast could continue, but then she realized that the battlefield was too far away. It was beyond her reach. The broadcast room was filled with howls of grief when they saw the transmitted image. Some people didn't give up and encouraged, "Brothers and sisters of Xia City, it's time for you to show your worth." There really was a response from Xia City. "I'm looking at Dongshuan Beach. I'm going with you." Squeak. "I'll go." They're specifically currying favor with Her Majesty Empress Wu. Please share your live broadcast room number. Please open up the donation channel. It'll be easier to handle the aftermath. No matter how noisy the broadcast room was, Zhang was very anxious. She looked all around trying to find a miraculous way to rush over. At this time her earlobes heated up again. Tianbang continued to tease. "Do you need a ride? I just happen to have a flying car. I can just go downstairs." Zhang turned her head. After being taken advantage of for so long, she finally saw Tianbang's face after the battle. Tianbang was actually in a sorry state at the moment. His hair was a little unkempt because he was directly facing Jin Tong's extraordinary electric field, and there was even a scorch mark on his face, adding some blood and fire to his sunny, boyish smile. Of course, it also revealed part of his true nature. Zhang blinked. The bit of emotion in her heart was quickly diluted. Doubt surged in her mind, and the vague thoughts that originally existed gradually became clear. "You guys, you can't use the word we carelessly. I'm such a clean stream. When you mention me it sounds like I'm forming a clique and scheming." That's how it was. Zhang was about to ask again when Tianbang took the lead. He leaped out of the broken window and flew downwards. This office building had been tossed around for so long. Anyone who wanted to use the elevator would have a serious problem with their intelligence. Zhang naturally followed, but when she came out of the window she subconsciously turned her head. She saw He Weiyin staying at the scene. She had no intention of following. "Hey, hurry up." Tianbang called out from below. Zhang caught up. "What about Vice President He? She also has to clean up the mess. Ever since she became a secretary this skill has been maxed out. I'm training Juling so that he can learn more." Zhang sighed. She felt that Tianbang's description of Officer He's character was a little broken. But very quickly, the desolate scene below dominated her senses and state of mind. Looking at the buildings that were almost in ruins, Zhang could not help but feel sorrowful. The aftermath was probably the most difficult. The number of casualties caused by the clash of transcendence just now was probably no less than the chaos from last night until now. It was true that the police had sealed off the office building, but they had also used manpower. Just now almost the entire building had been blown up. The police on duty should have suffered heavy casualties. Just as she was thinking, Zhang's line of sight coincidentally cut into the broken window of the dilapidated building. She caught a glimpse of a young policeman sitting on the ground in a daze. Clearly he was stunned by the scene just now. But the key point was that he was still alive. It was not just this person. Along the way Zhang saw more and more policemen. There were not many normal people. Dazed, stunned, crying, laughing, but they were all alive. Although it was not pleasant to hear, Zhang still had to say that this was the biggest abnormality. Zhang was also stunned. They again. Zhang took a deep breath and ignored Tianbang's joke. She asked directly, how did they survive? She knew herself. At the moment when the two transcendents collided, even if she, a level C ability user, was placed a few floors below, it would be difficult for her to survive the impact of the volcanic eruption. If there were dozens or hundreds of policemen in the building and only one person was lucky enough to survive, it would be acceptable. But if dozens or hundreds of policemen all died, it could only mean that there was a force more powerful than the goddess of luck at work. The camera that was synchronized with Zhang's line of sight also showed the situation in the dilapidated building to the live broadcast room. D***M, I clearly saw someone being blasted out of the building by the shockwave, and there was more than one. Where are the corpses? There are no corpses, but a few people successfully landed in the air. There are also the new generation of iron men and poor conductors. I feel like I won't survive. The inner world has already been crushed by the military and police's combat power, right? The waterfall-like bullet screen was mostly filled with exclamations of admiration and ridicule. Compared to this, the comments on the forums were a bit more practical. Someone deduced, "Take care of this lowly person's weak logic." I would rather believe that when Her Majesty Empress Wu made her move, there was someone by her side to protect her. A certain Xia City ID made a direct judgment. The Empress Wu is in charge of offense and the president is in charge of defense. The Empress Wu is in charge of external affairs and the president is in charge of internal affairs. There's nothing wrong with that. Are you talking about Ouyang Chen? It makes sense if he was the one providing support. It would be in line with his usual style. This way we can explain things to the government and the military. With the confluence of the military and government forces, does Xia City really want to play independent? It can't compare to some headquarters. They sell their bodies to lick the boots of others while they're at it. Xiachuei is inflated. It's full of farts inside. Motherf ***. I'll give you this. Which bastard was the one who leaked the 2000s? Several floors later, the map rumbled and exploded. At this time, those who still persisted in rational discussion belonged to the outliers. Someone in the middle asked weakly, "What if Her Majesty Empress Wu did all of this by herself? What does that mean?" This was originally a very good question, but a certain ID cut in at the right time and analyzed the overall situation. His mouth was very big and his tone was even louder. Xia City probably wants to establish its might. Ouyang Chen and Yu Gang are certainly involved in this plan, and they most likely didn't play a good role. Establishing its might is especially effeminate. Can it really frighten people without the deaths of millions? **CK The person above just opened his mouth. That's awesome. The person above is the one with commendable courage. That's right, I'm talking about you. The great blood demon is mighty. He hit the nail on the head. Purple gold authentication. It really is blood demon. I'll take a photo with Great God Blood Demon as a souvenir. Is Great God Blood Demon still accepting disciples? Can I kneel first? Because of the sudden appearance of the extraordinary blood demon, the RT-8313 mission thread became exceptionally noisy. After a series of tosses and turns, the thread basically reached a consensus. Indeed, under the provocation of 2016 billion resources, the eyes of the vast majority of people would turn red with greed. If Xia City was suspected to be an allied power and haggled over the lives of people at this time, it probably wouldn't serve as a deterrent. Instead, it would encourage the greed of certain people and nurture their wishful thinking. So you're saying that Jin Tong can also retreat unscathed? Most likely. How many extraordinaries are there in this society? If one were to be cut down just like that, the pressure on Xia City would be enormous. In the thread, someone had already posted a crying laughing emoji. Thanks to the great blood demon's auspicious words, I will immediately book a plane ticket to Xia City. When I return, I might even be able to get the treatment of being escorted out of the country as a gift. Shameless as the person above. Will you allow me to tour Xia City with you? Let's go together. One-way plane tickets should be enough. Dog fart. Pure trash. Zhang Yingying was still spinning around on the Huanhai Highway due to the problem of the journey. She was already very annoyed, but when she saw the message on the forum, her anger surged. She smashed her fist on the steel plate of the car. There was a loud bang and the place where she smashed her fist made a deep dent. This is an armored car. The corner of the special police officer's eye twitched, but he didn't dare to say anything. Zhang Yingying's anger had yet to subside. She smashed the car 2 more times. Suddenly she froze. Her gaze pierced through the front windshield and looked at the scenery of the sea and sky outside the Huanhai Highway. After going around for half a day, she had actually fought her way here. Stop the car. The armored car finally got the chance to show off its performance. Came to a screeching stop. Zhang Yingying pushed open the car door and leaped. She circled around the body of the car like a flipping petrel and plunged down the sea of the precipice. When the special police officer staggered out of the car, he saw the long-legged beauty with a strange temper running fast on the precipice, still heading for the golden beach in the distance. With a muffled bang, a column of water dozens of meters high exploded on the surface of the sea 100 meters offshore. The surging waves and the splashing water droplets almost slaughtered all the creatures in the surrounding water, including the undercurrents in the deeper water. After such a series of actions, the terrifying kinetic impact was finally reduced by more than half. Ah! Jin Tong gasped loudly. He popped his head out of the shallow water, but he spat out another mouthful of blood, which mixed with the icy rain, salt water, gray waves and white foam. There were also the remains of several fish and jellyfish. He felt that most of his soul had been lost. But he didn't have time to think about the extent of the injury to his body and soul. Instead he used all his strength to stimulate his yuan qi and calm his mind. He also prepared an overbearing secret technique to stimulate his potential, ready to withstand the terrifying impact from Her Majesty Empress Wu. However, after a few seconds, although the pressure from the opposite side was always there, the substantial impact did not come. I actually smashed into the sea. Good luck. The sound waves were transmitted from the golden beach that faced the sea. Under the erosion of the freezing rain, the color of the beach was somewhat dim, like an orange peel that was close to rotting. Jin Tong was even more convinced that it was the death domain of the beauty on the shore. This, Her Majesty Empress Wu, who was respectfully addressed by the world, was now like a petty bourgeois girl strolling in the morning. She wore a classic white shirt paired with black wide-legged pants, with a slightly unruly leopard belt in the middle. Her shoes and socks could not be seen clearly. She could only see that her clothes were light and thin, swaying gently in the wind. She appeared even more elegant and pleasing to the eye. It was just that she was out of season. Of course, for an extraordinary like Her Majesty Empress Wu, the season had never been a factor. It was fine as long as it was arranged according to her mood. At this moment her long hair was casually draped over her shoulders, dancing in the sea breeze and freezing rain. She was too lazy to take care of it and it was already slightly wet. What was even more eye-catching was that she was holding an ancient book with slightly yellow pages that were vertically arranged. Just like how the ancients would read, the book was rolled up, leaving only 1 or 2 rows of ink characters. She ignored the wind and the rain and slowly savored it. When the voice rang out, Her Majesty Empress Wu did not even look Jin Tong in the eye. She was leisurely reading the book, seemingly attentive yet bored. She had even flipped a page in between. She was posturing, right? So. But when they had exchanged blows just now, she had also been in this state. This woman, Wu Jiong, had smashed him into the sea while flipping through the book. Jin Tong stared fixedly at the beauty on the shore. No one could understand the pressure here better than he did. Of course, there was even more shame and fear. The depression in his chest surged up and he barely managed to swallow it back down. And this irrational action further worsened the injuries on his body. This woman had integrated the format of fire at the beginning of her attack in the office building. Using an inconceivable method, she had forcefully pressed this special power of formatting into his body, interfering with and destroying his semi-metallic and near-superconducting body structure. After that, she had simply and straightforwardly attacked him with kinetic energy. She had even beaten his originally strongest physical cultivation into a half-cripple. Now he no longer had a chance to turn the situation around. The venom of her vision, the ruthlessness of her heart, and the strangeness of her methods were truly something that Jin Tong had never seen before in his life. She had just become an extraordinary 2 months ago. Jin Tong had a mother****, that he had directly sent to all the intelligence agencies of the inner worlds. This kind of skillful and flawless attack method, let alone 2 months, even the veteran extraordinary who had cultivated for more than 20 years would most likely be brought to their knees. There were many strong men in the world who could swing a 1,000-pound hammer, but to be able to use a 1,000-pound hammer to weave brocade and embroider. Just what kind of monster was she? Jin Tong's mind was in turmoil. He felt that if he continued to let his imagination run wild, he might directly collapse. He could only forcibly restrain his mind, endure the discomfort of his body and hoarsely say, "Wu Jiong, what the hell are you trying to do?" Her Majesty Empress Wu's attention was still on the book, or it could be said that she was in the most comfortable state she had created for herself. Jin Tong's clear questioning words entered her ears, but she didn't even raise her eyelids. "I warned you before not to go ashore or else I would beat you to death. Let's not talk about the process, but now you've perfectly fallen back into the sea and haven't set foot on the shoreline. For the sake of this luck, I won't see you out." Jin Tong stared fixedly at Her Majesty Empress Wu. He didn't believe that the basis of this woman's decision was some damned luck, or whatever. Even saying it was mood was more reliable than that. But he didn't say anything else. In this kind of situation he would be an idiot if he spat out another word. Jin Tong had fought with the aberrations in the wilderness all year round, and it wasn't the first time he had encountered a crisis that could kill him. This had also trained him to be soft and hard, straightforward and submissive in his style of doing things. If he couldn't beat her, then he couldn't beat her. If Her Majesty Empress Wu really wanted his life, he would fight to the death. But since she didn't care about him, what harm was there in enduring for a moment and retreating? Jin Tong slowly breathed in and out. His body cut through the icy cold water and slowly moved backwards. But at this moment he suddenly heard a vague sound. Someone was rushing over at lightning speed, and the content of the shouts was related to him. His heart jumped slightly and he looked at Her Majesty Empress Wu on the shore. Even though there was a third party involved, this beautiful woman still didn't have any intention of changing her decision. The book in her hands flipped over another page. The patter of freezing rain fell, drenching her clothes and long hair, but when it touched the page, it all silently melted away. He had already been completely ignored. This wasn't an act. Perhaps from the very beginning Her Majesty Empress Wu had never cared about him. Jin Tong gave Her Majesty Empress Wu a deep look. He wanted to carve this clearly high-profile yet mysterious woman into his heart. Soon after, his entire body sank into the surface of the sea, retreating towards the deep sea. A few seconds later he disappeared into the misty depths of the vast ocean. Hey. Just half a minute after Jin Tong disappeared, Zhang Yingying rushed over from the distant Huanhai highway, panting. But in the end she was still a step too late. She could only watch helplessly as Jin Tong disappeared into the distance. Her enthusiasm of seeing the battlefield fly over from beyond the sky and joining in on the fun was completely doused in ice. Zhang Yingying looked at her boss with a gaze of disbelief. Although she knew that no one could guess her boss's thoughts in this dangerous time of war, to send off a great extraordinary enemy with a wave of his hand, such a strange train of thought. No, someone on the internet had clearly deduced this. Boss, you, Zhang Yingying wanted to say, boss, are you crazy? But she finally knew how to swallow those words. Then she wanted to say, don't tell me you guys really don't dare to kill me. But she felt that it was too sudden. Following that, her quick-witted mind couldn't find a third suitable replacement word. She could only say, you, for a long time. Even though she couldn't say the words out loud, her attitude was expressed. Her Majesty Empress Wu still gave face to her subordinates. She moved her gaze away from the scroll in her hand and looked at Zhang Yingying. She nodded and said, you've almost reached the limit of your current level. The effects of cultivating your mind and body during this period of time are not bad. Next, you need to carve out your own path in order to change your fate and become independent from the world. Defy the heavens and change my fate? Boss, you've read too many novels. Zhang Yingying was so angry that she laughed. Also, are you reading Buddhist scriptures? Had he read too many Buddhist scriptures and learned the heart of a bodhisattva? That place is obviously full of bragging ****. Her Majesty Empress Wu turned her gaze back to the scroll. She said unhurriedly, no matter how you boast, as long as you can boast to the point that many people don't doubt it, it can also be considered an extraordinary power that defies the heavens and changes fate. Of course, it would be better if there was a self-consistent logic. Considering that this is the result of an uncivilized civilization, it's not unreasonable to raise its value a bit higher. Ah, Your Majesty, I'm not discussing Buddhist scriptures with you. You said it first. Then I'll tell you now. Why did you let the enemy escape? Answer me. Indulging the enemy? I didn't. You're still saying you didn't? I saw it all. That Jin Tong escaped right under your eyes. Didn't you see the comments online? Those greedy, insatiable and lawless troublemakers are all celebrating, okay? You let Jin Tong go. You're simply encouraging them to come to Xia City to hunt. Luo Nan's side is dead. You're talking about Jin Tong. Has he broken away from the battlefield? Her Majesty Empress Wu raised her gaze once more. She looked at the drizzling rain falling from the sky. She casually extended her hand and caught a drop of rain on her fingertip. She pinched it lightly. If everyone believes that he has broken away, then I have nothing to say. Zhang Yingying was at a loss and puzzled. When you're weak, acting cute is instinctive. When you're in danger, being low-key is smart. But when you need to be responsible, you still play old tricks. This malicious act of acting cute is just asking for a beating. Luckily, Ying, you're still in the legal stage of acting cute. Come on, smile for us to see. Zhang Ying wanted to kneel before her boss. She was just about to throw caution to the wind and unleash her great act of unreasonable behavior when her heart inexplicably trembled. The white rainbow circulating around her body hummed. It was as if a layer of gloomy clouds had condensed into a clear intent. But when she tried to sense it again, it was hard to grasp. She just felt that the dusky scene of the sea and sky before her eyes seemed to have become much more oppressive. Chapter 513. Ever since the era of distortion, the ocean was an even more dangerous wilderness. The original ecology of the ocean had already suffered irreversible damage, and a new aberrant biosphere had taken its place. In a certain sense, there were no living creatures in the ocean that were not aberrant. Even the most common of fish and shrimp had traces of aberration. Jin Tong silently swam in the ocean. Even someone as experienced as him had to be extremely careful in such a region, not to mention that he was currently heavily injured. But from another perspective, it was only in this environment where danger lurked on every side that he could slightly dispel the deep pressure Her Majesty Empress Wu exerted on him. Perhaps Her Majesty Empress Wu had the demeanor of a powerhouse who would keep her word. But his hunter's instincts still made Jin Tong use the complex environment of the ocean to make a series of evasive maneuvers. Right now, he was at least 100 kilometers away from the shoreline. He had stirred up 2 large shoals of fish along the way. With them as cover, even the most proficient in tracking techniques would find it hard to track his movements in a short amount of time. But during the tense process of making arrangements, he would occasionally have bad memories enter his mind. Most of them were scenes of bitter defeats in Xia City. There was nothing he could do about it. He unconsciously had to use Her Majesty Empress Wu as a foundation when he made all his arrangements. Every thought was a type of deduction and calculation. It was impossible to escape. Only after directly confronting Her Majesty Empress Wu did he understand how terrifying this woman was. Jin Tong had mingled in the inner world for a long time. He was a first-rate hunter in the wilderness. He recognized nearly all of the 100 or so extraordinaries in the world. He had a deep understanding of the situation in this circle. Of the extraordinaries he knew, none of them could be underestimated. Each of them had their own unique skills. However, in the 50 years since the advent of the era of distortion, there had not been a truly complete cultivation system in the world. All ability users, including the extraordinaries, were still fumbling around. When he sparred with those extraordinaries, he could feel the different brilliance of each person. He could feel their marvelous domains, but upon closer examination, there were always some details that were a bit prickly. It was hard to call them perfect. Only when sparring with Her Majesty Empress Wu gave him a completely different feeling. Strictly speaking, the clash between the two lasted only 3 rounds. But in these 3 rounds, Her Majesty Empress Wu's moves seemed simple and clear, but they were all just right. Not one bit more, not one bit less. Her control of the battlefield, her attacks, and her changes in tempo were simply textbook demonstrations. It made people feel that she was not only broad-minded, but also had a mature and stable set of rules. From Jin Tong's point of view, Her Majesty Empress Wu's attack had no flaws or weaknesses. Every detail was perfect, forming a towering peak that could not be moved. This was the so-called, the more you look up to it, the more you look up to it. What was a divine weapon and what was a piece of scrap metal? It was clear as soon as one touched it. In fact, when the martial monarch released the techniques of the dripping sword and the burning heart saber on the internet, it had already given people such a feeling. It wasn't difficult to come up with an offensive technique. What was truly difficult was to be precise, concise, and high level. The more Jin Tong experienced it, the more he felt that there was a lot of knowledge in it. Looking at it this way, even though he had lost miserably, he had gained a lot as well. It would be greatly beneficial for him to comprehend it carefully when he returned. Jin Tong sighed unconsciously. Are there really people who are born with knowledge in this world? No, that's not right. Jin Tong suddenly shook his head and subconsciously touched the metal band on his forehead. The perennial chill seeped into his skull, but it suddenly stirred up a fire in his heart. There was no such thing as someone who was born with knowledge in this world. Putting the miraculous label on an unsolved matter was just the behavior of a fool. Rather than putting someone else on a pedestal, it was better to put himself in their shoes and think. Perhaps Her Majesty Empress Wu's achievements had a more complicated origin, just like what he had experienced in the past. The fire in his heart didn't last too long, and baseless speculation couldn't solve his current injuries. Jin Tong sank that speculation to the bottom of his heart and wanted to find a relatively safe area to recuperate. He moved, gently shaking his body to rub against the vibrations of the seawater. He emitted ultrasonic waves like a dolphin, probing the surrounding terrain and the living creatures. This was a small technique that experts of the physical side used in place of spiritual senses. It was said that there were many living creatures in the natural world that could emit ultrasonic waves and infrasound waves. Dolphins, bats, tigers, and elephants before the era of distortion were all typical examples. After the change of generations, there were only more such living creatures. Jin Tong knew that there were at least 100 species of living creatures on land and in the sea that possessed similar instincts. However, to be like Luonan of Xia City, to be able to emit destructive high-energy infrasound waves by relying on a mutant tool that wasn't even remotely related Jin Tong's thoughts suddenly froze. That's not right. There was no reason for him to suddenly think of Luonan. Jin Tong's psychic senses of an extraordinary and the reality of his heavy injuries made him exceptionally sensitive. Moreover, he really did have a feeling of discomfort. His figure suddenly came to a stop, calmly hovering in the seawater. He temporarily stopped using ultrasonic waves to probe. His figure merged with the seawater and only his thoughts and senses spun at high speeds. He switched from active probing to passive receiving. Every movement in the surrounding sea area was transmitted to him through vibrations, temperature, and other forms. He didn't have the extensive and meticulous perception methods of psychic ability users, but his tempered psychic senses could target a vague threat point in a certain direction and obtain an instinctive response. He could at least know where the threat was coming from through this method. However, the problem was much more serious than he imagined it to be. After he truly reacted, he discovered that all around him, above and below him, actually, he could sense the entire sea area. He had entered a subtle and ice-cold atmosphere. Perhaps there wasn't anything that could directly threaten his life right now, but it was as if there was an incorporeal specter near him. The specter wandered about, drifting up and down. A bone-chilling chill that transcended the plane of reality seeped into him, thread by thread. This chill seemed to be familiar to him. Jin Tong's figure floated up with a thought, and he broke through the surface of the sea. The gloomy colors of the sea and sky had persisted for many days. The surroundings of Xia City and the open sea were all like this. Right now, the sea was covered in powdery rain. It couldn't be considered a freezing rain, but it was still cold and dense. Jin Tong allowed the powdery rain to brush against his face as he gazed into the distance. He relied on the keen perception of an extraordinary to lock onto a blurry yet tangible dividing line from the dusky scene of the sea and sky. It was this dividing line that separated the pure power of nature and the interfering scene that was infused with the will and emotions of an individual. Commonly known as a domain. This dividing line continued to push into the distant sea area without end. It dyed the boundless sea and sky with a deep personal color, as well as a bone-chilling killing intent. So that's how it is. Jin Tong had long since seen through the strange phenomenon of the freezing rain in Xia City. It was the result of human influence. But he had always believed that the work, including the raindrop sword slaughter, should have come from Her Majesty Empress Wu. But after fighting with Her Majesty Empress Wu, he suddenly came to a realization. This was absolutely not the work of that person. The chill was exposed and the killing intent was dense. It was far too different from Her Majesty Empress Wu's perfect harmony. Of course, it wasn't Ouyang Qin either. This state of wanton spreading was completely different from that person's strict style. In other words, there was actually a third person besides Ouyang Qin and Her Majesty Empress Wu. This person was. Jin Tong carefully sensed the concentrated emotions and killing intent in this region, and he came to an answer. There was no doubt that only those extraordinary characters of the mental side, and they weren't bound by common sense, could construct such a weak yet inconceivably embryonic domain. There were many famous characters in Xia City, but most of them were already set in stone. There was only one up-and-coming star who had made a great name for himself in a short period of time. Moreover, this star was one of Jin Tong's targets in his trip to Xia City. Luonan? Was it him? Jin Tong was still a bit uncertain. The interference power of this freezing rain domain towards the plane of reality was very ordinary. It lacked a constructed pillar and backbone, and it wouldn't pose too much of a threat to true experts. But how far was he from the shore? He used the satellite positioning system to confirm his latitude and longitude. He was roughly 200 nautical miles away from Xia City. The straight-line distance was nearly 400 kilometers. If the range of Xia City itself was included, then it could be said that it was truly 1,000 kilometers away. It blotted out the sky and covered the earth. What a joke. Anyone who could expand their mental senses to 1/10 of the range would be an extraordinary. Then what was this fellow? Extraordinary X 10? Jin Tong suddenly understood how Gang Xiong and Noise had died. Doing things within this range of mental senses was practically the same as putting one's heart against the tip of a knife, shouting, "If you don't stab me to death, then you're my grandson." What was the point of not dying? Though he was already several hundred kilometers away from Xia City, Luo Nan's knife light had begun to draw shadows behind his neck. Jin Tong snorted coldly when he thought of this. His energy surged outwards, forcefully breaking through the rain and mist that filled the sky. The penetrating chill was isolated outside. He soon discovered that this was meaningless. He suspected that Luo Nan's domain did not specialize in confinement and killing. It was more like a carrier for mental senses. So what if he drove it away and shielded it? The dividing line of the sea and sky scene was several dozen kilometers wide. It was vast and mighty, and it was hard to see the end. How could he drive it away with the strength of one person? Could it be that he had guessed wrong? Luo Nan had the strength of one person. How in the world did he accomplish this? He carefully examined the principles of this domain. It was connected to the polar domain above and to the microscopic form below. Only by severing this connection would he be able to act. It would have been fine if he was on the mental side. At worst he could just retaliate back. But in this current situation, Jin Tong let out a breath. He was simply unable to estimate the limits of Luo Nan's soul strength. He was also unable to imagine the scale of Luo Nan's reserves. Cough cough. His blood rushed to his throat, causing a knot to form in his heart. His irritation gradually rose. If he were at his peak he wouldn't care. Even if Luo Nan entangled him, Luo Nan would be nothing more than a mosquito. Luo Nan would not be able to harm his foundation. But right now he urgently needed to find a place to heal his injuries. How could he gather his strength if he was constantly being watched? Jin Tong suppressed his negative emotions with difficulty, but he knew that he had to change his plans. He hoped that Her Majesty Empress Wu was a person who kept her promise. He used his wristband to contact his subordinate who had been lingering in the open sea. He reported his current coordinates. "Come here and pick me up." It was safest for an injured beast to lick its wounds in an isolated and uninhabited place. But right now Luo Nan was like a maggot attached to the bone. He needed to leave the sea area covered by the freezing rain domain as soon as possible. He crossed the dividing line with the fastest speed possible, suppressing the expansion speed of Luo Nan's domain. Jin Tong quickly hung up the phone, but he could still hear his subordinate trembling with excessive joy. Clearly, the news of his great defeat in Xia City had already spread. "Do they think I'm going to die?" Jin Tong snorted coldly. He recalled the rather famous female streamer from the inner world in the office building. With such a person there, the news of him being blasted out of Xia City would probably be known by the entire world. Even though he was at his level, empty fame was no longer a burden. But when he thought of Her Majesty Empress Wu's awe-inspiring divine might, he couldn't help but be in a bad mood. His thoughts reached this point and his mind became a bit absent-minded. He unconsciously recalled the details of his experience fighting against Her Majesty Empress Wu. He pondered over how he should deal with her if they were to fight again. It was absolutely impossible for ordinary methods to match up to her perfection and profoundness. His thoughts entered the alley and it was hard to deviate. Jin Tong stood on the surface of the sea, his mind immersed within. He was in a trance, unaware of the passage of time. Jin Tong only came to his senses when the sound of his subordinate's airship entered his ears. He wanted to move, but his chest suddenly felt stifled. He discovered that he was lacking in blood essence. Hiss, I was actually exhausting my mind to make a deduction just now. How could I do something so unwise? Jin Tong's mind was agitated, and it was as if a cup of ice water had been poured over his heart. He suddenly felt that something was wrong. The airship that was approaching at high speed was already clear in silhouette. He could even see the cockpit and the figures of the people on the front deck. But why were those people staring in shock and fear? Chapter 5:14. The airship came close to the surface of the water. Someone on the deck finally struggled out of his terror and shouted loudly to remind his captain. However, he couldn't say anything in his anxiety. Jin Tong didn't need to be reminded to know that he had fallen into a trap. Just as the shadow appeared, his sensitive spiritual sense was covered by a layer of mist, making it hard for him to see clearly. He sank his mind and subconsciously took a step out on the surface of the sea. He saw a black curtain falling from the sky, covered by an infinite starry sky. He saw smoke and clouds rising together, and there was even the sound of metal clanking. As for the feeling on his body, it became even worse. It was as if he was wrapped by something, and it was very difficult to move. Jin Tong's face darkened. Just as he was about to return to his inner vision to check his meridians, a huge furry claw suddenly stretched out from the depths of the smoke and clouds, pouncing towards him. Blood-colored flames curled around it. Before it could be seen, the surrounding void and even the spiritual plane were already rumbling and shaking. It was as if a volcano had erupted, shaking the earth and mountains, and the scorching heat was pressing down. Such a close distance, such a violent method, and it could even surround the spiritual and material planes. There was no room for people to move or dodge. It was difficult to even find the time to think. Jin Tong's eyes flashed with electricity. He slashed with his half-metal arm, and the electric long blade slashed down with thunder. The electric blade and blood claw collided with each other. Smoke and clouds surged, and the black curtain distorted. One could hear the sound of waves and wind. The sound of the real world seemed to be separated by a thin layer of paper, but it couldn't penetrate no matter what. *CK. Jin Tong's hostility increased, and he slashed down with another electric blade. Electric arcs flashed like a dragon. When the dual-purpose airship crashed into the water, the members of the 5-metal hunting group on it saw Jin Tong submerged in a cloud of flickering smoke. Within it, there was a blood-like flame burning, and there was also a long chain of electric light darting left and right. The light was dazzling, but the cloud was cloudy and constantly expanding. In the blink of an eye, it covered an area of several square kilometers. It was even more impenetrable. At most they could see some blurry silhouettes. There was their captain inside, and there was also a huge and shocking demonic shadow. It seemed like they were engaged in an intense battle. The person in charge of the airship was a bald man named Tong Kan. He was also an architect with a combat strength of B-. He was quite famous in the inner world for his brutal and fierce close combat skills. He was a first-rate grandmaster of combat, and was the classic example of someone who was careless on the outside but meticulous on the inside. He was in the control room right now, looking at the marvelous scene on the surface of the sea. He thought to himself, could it be that Xia City is unforgiving? Could it be that they sent people to hunt me down? Could it be that two extraordinaries are fighting with their extraordinary domains? If that was the case, then he shouldn't have gotten too close. He ordered loudly, turn the rudder quickly. Who would have thought that not only was the cloud expanding at an extremely fast speed, but it was also leak-proof. Suddenly, a long lightning dragon appeared at the edge of the cloud, tearing through the clouds and pouncing towards the airship. Be it in the steering room or on the deck, the group of people turned pale with shock. "Leader, it's us." His words were completely useless. The lightning flashed at an incredible speed. In the blink of an eye, the uncontrollable lightning dragon hit the airship head-on, sending electric arcs everywhere. It must be said that this was Jin Tong's ride. Considering the range of his abilities and the complex environment he was using it in, all the important areas had been isolated by electromagnetic force. However, if the power of extraordinaries was so easily blocked, then they would be underestimating the apex powerhouses of this world too much. The electromagnetic fields interacted with each other, and the killing intent of extraordinaries poured into the airship as catalysis. A considerable portion of the airship's electronic components were instantly burned down. There were even a few unlucky fellows on the deck who were struck by the electric arcs. Their entire bodies caught on fire, and they were sent flying into the sea, sinking to the bottom. "Leader." Boss. The members of the hunting group on the deck covered their heads and scurried away like rats, but they didn't forget to call out in warning. However, the response from the cloud of smoke was a second lightning dragon that flew up. Miserable howls rang out in the control room. We've been sucked in. Get lost. Tong Ken threw himself over to personally take control of the helm, but the steering gear could only turn idle. The system interface next to it was distorted and indistinct. The corresponding powerful electric and magnetic fields exerted their effects at the same time, causing the airship's structure to warp violently. At the same time, the people on the airship were also warped. This was the destructive power of extraordinaries, but how did it end up on their heads? In the control room, Tong Ken was in a daze from the fall. He didn't know how many pieces of equipment had been crushed under his body. As he struggled to get up, his body suddenly stiffened. He could clearly hear the sound of violent panting. How familiar was that sound? It was clearly his leader's voice. He raised his head in shock, but he didn't see anyone. Instead, he saw that the airship had at some point entered a dark and chaotic area. It was lost and he didn't know where it was going. The next moment, the electric arcs were as majestic as the sea, instantly submerging the airship. Huff, huff, huff. Jean Tong's breathing became increasingly heavy and his mind buzzed. Fortunately, his thoughts were still flowing. Was he dead? Would he still be alive? He wasn't pessimistic enough to give himself a definite answer. He just wanted to know if the sanguine ape behemoth that he had killed 7 times in a row would come back to life. After falling into the dark veil of smoke, he thought that he should fall into an extraordinary domain like the logic world. The domain of constructing spatial faults was a very popular direction. Luonan. It was Luonan, right? The domain he constructed was very low level and its stability was terrible. It even exposed a few laws and foundations. Luonan could faintly examine its framework. It was simply an incomplete embryonic form. Jean Tong didn't have any thoughts of looking down on Luonan. He just looked down on Luonan, who had inexplicably fallen into a trap. What kind of trash was he? He felt that he had already overestimated this mental genius, but reality was even crueler. He didn't know where Luonan got this monster from, but its offensive power was absolutely strong. There was clearly some sort of resurrection ability within this smoke. Jean Tong beheaded it again and again. He tore it to shreds, but it always reappeared within a mass of bloody light. Its strength didn't seem to weaken at all. All right. Frankly speaking, compared to the resurrection of the sanguine ape, this smoke, this starry sky, this black veil, this shadow, this powerful enemy, where did it come from? Who did it change to? These were the big questions that pressed down on one's heart. Jean Tong impatiently wanted to understand how this domain worked. He wanted to know where the specter that was reflected in the lake of his heart came from. Compared to the sanguine ape, which was at most a B+ rank attack, the incorporeal specter that possessed his body was his greatest calamity. The incorporeal specter had been manipulating Jean Tong in the dark throughout the course of his battle with the sanguine ape. It took advantage of Jean Tong being heavily injured to the point that his foundation was unstable to extract an unending stream of blood essence from his body and scatter it into the depths of the boundless smoke. Jean Tong felt as if he was carrying a heavy burden, as if he had lost a great deal of blood. Considering the effects of the domain, perhaps he had contributed to the resurrection of the sanguine ape behemoth. The specter was so indistinct. It seemed real yet illusory. Jean Tong looked back several times, but he couldn't find it. He even wanted to chop off the flesh on his back in order to feel refreshed. Fortunately, his most basic rationality was still there, preventing his morbid wild fantasies. He just didn't understand. Luonan this junior. How long has it been since he got up? How did he get these resources? Before this thought was clear, another threat came from ahead. The 8th resurrection? Jean Tong was gritting his teeth when he suddenly discovered that it wasn't the sanguine ape that came out. Instead, it was a middle-aged man, and he looked quite familiar. Jean Tong didn't move for a time. He looked at the middle-aged man in front of him, not saying a word. The middle-aged man walked over with 2 steps, and his body transformed into black smoke. He seemed indistinct, but there was a sense of seriousness that was real and not illusory. His aura was scorching hot like magma. Fire poison gushed out and poured over. This was the sole body of black smoke? Jean Tong thought of a major event that happened not too long ago in Xia City. It shook the inner world. There were 2 main characters in the story. One was Tianbang, who was known as Blood Prison. The other was the Elder of the Blood Flame Order, Mo Lun. That's right. Though there were some differences in the details, the aura was exactly the same. Jin Tong had interacted with this veteran power a few times in his early years. They could be considered acquaintances. Aren't you already dead? Could it be you? Jin Tong's wording was a bit messy. On one hand, the situation was changing more and more strangely. On the other hand, the embryonic domain that was constantly expanding and condensing released even more information when he switched targets. He needed to carefully examine it. It was difficult for him to be distracted. Mo Luan didn't respond. He didn't say a word as he pounced forward and fought Jin Tong. Jin Tong didn't fear Mo Luan even though he was currently heavily injured due to the difference in realms between an extraordinary and an architect. What's more, this fellow's combat style was clearly somewhat stiff and inflexible. He wasn't like a living person. Was he a puppet? Actually, Jin Tong could have beheaded Mo Luan in the 5th round, but he didn't do so. This was because Mo Luan's existence had opened up some of his train of thought. Every order had its own set of rules and laws. If it was the Blood Flame Order. Jin Tong suddenly came to a realization when he looked at some of the foundations of the laws exposed in the misty space. Sure enough, this place was actually an altar that hadn't truly been completed. It was just an old trick of the Blood Flame Order. They borrowed external power to make the so-called blood flame will materialize and receive its blessing. If one looked at it from this angle, though it was a sacrifice, the 3 animals weren't prepared. He was the animal used to sacrifice to the heavens. You've got guts. His heart exploded with fury and he laughed in his extreme anger. Lightning was like a blade in an instant and the magnetic force was like a lock. He locked Mo Luan's figure in an instant and killed him with a single slash. However, the black smoke dispersed and reformed. Mo Luan's body was reborn within a few breaths, and he pounced forward once more. So, you've also become a puppet in this chaotic world. Is this a conspiracy of the Blood Flame Order? Or is this the handiwork of that kid Luonan? It can't be that Luonan already predicted my fate, right? Jin Tong's mind rang with alarm when this thought became clear. He was a grand and powerful extraordinary, yet he actually had such weak thoughts. His mental strength was clearly damaged. He couldn't waste any more time. It just so happened that he had roughly seen through the changes in the laws of space. If he didn't exert his strength now, when would he? This thought was born, and the metal hoop on top of Jin Tong's head became even colder. A slight pain pierced his forehead and it changed in an instant. It was like fire and lightning striking down from his brain, binding his entire body. Jin Tong's pupils darkened as the pain assaulted him. The lightning and magnetic field ring retracted within his body, allowing Mo Luan to attack within. His gaze grew even colder as he watched the black smoke's soul body transform from illusory to real, about to seep into his body to attack. Suddenly, thunder rumbled in the air and lightning flew out before the thunder. It slashed through the black smoke in front of him. Not only did this slash kill Mo Luan once more, but its power grew even stronger. It brought with it an electric and magnetic field, using ionization and electrolysis to diffuse the void. It mixed with material properties and contained a sharp edge. It forcefully pierced through the transformation of the smoke and clouds. Another clap of thunder rang out and light suddenly appeared. A high cliff suddenly rose from beneath Jin Tong's feet. Its power coiled and lingered and lava flowed. There was an altar at the peak of the mountain. Rays of light coiled around it, forming over a dozen groups of runes. The mountain acted as a prison trapping Jin Tong within. The binding and oppressive feeling behind him grew heavier, faintly resonating with the altar and the runes. Jin Tong laughed in spite of himself. He had finally revealed himself. Though this place was unfamiliar, he had Mo Luan's lead and combined it with the relevant information. He already had some ideas. The Blood Soul Temple. It really was a remnant of the Blood Flame Order. What was the relationship between Luonan and the Blood Flame Order? Forget it. None of this was important. It could be seen from the attack just now that Jin Tong's extraordinary strength had already exceeded the bearing range of Luonan's embryonic domain. Then no matter how miraculous the Blood Soul Temple was, it was nothing more than an illusion to him. Could it be that Mo Luan was no longer reborn? He had even used his own psychic perception to capture the location where Luonan was suspected to be. That fellow was right above his head. Did he really think he was some sort of supernatural being that overlooked the world? Die. Jin Tong didn't give Luonan any time to react. Lightning condensed into a flying spear and he raised his arm ready to throw it. His strength was about to be released, but a few ice-cold fingers pressed against his wrist at this time. Behind him, Jin Tong's hair stood on end in an instant. Lightning swam around his body. Under the catalysis of the powerful electric field, his figure seemed to have shed the boundaries of an ordinary body. He twisted into light and pounced forward. He turned back in the blink of an eye, and the thunderclap lightning blade hummed as it slashed forward. The lightning had yet to arrive, but a figure had already appeared. Jin Tong's heart thumped heavily. He felt a bit stuffy. Wu Zhao. The person behind him wore a white shirt and trousers. His black hair was like a waterfall and he held a scroll in his hand. It was Her Majesty Empress Wu, who had just beaten him to the point where he couldn't even fight back. Jin Tong's mind nearly exploded in that instant. The only thought in his mind was to turn around and leave. But a second wave of stimulation from the metal headband poured into his mind, catalyzing his state to an unprecedented peak. His mind was even more marvelous. It was as if the heavens were helping him. His gaze swept past and he suddenly saw a faint shadow on Empress Wu's shoulder and flank. It was like limbs were spreading out. It was like a demon had appeared in a trance. This shadow. It was an incorporeal wraith. It was in the shape of a spider. That's right, the human-faced arachnid. Jin Tong seemed to understand a lot in that instant. He could clearly feel a great loss of blood and energy in this moment. It was as if a demonic god had chopped off half of his flesh and blood. And the flow of the vital energy of the flesh and blood was the amalgamation of the martial monarch and the human-faced arachnid before his eyes. To be precise, it was the image of the martial monarch that the human-faced arachnid had stripped from the depths of his mind. Jin Tong stared fixedly at this demonic image, and a few questions that were hard to solve were connected in his mind bit by bit. Without a doubt, this human-faced arachnid was the one that had possessed his body and soul. Its attack channel was most likely the crack in his mind that had appeared when he faced the martial monarch's miserable defeat. The human-faced arachnid had taken advantage of the flaw in his mind to extract a steady stream of blood essence and vital energy. It had fed Luo Nan's embryonic domain and propelled the operation of the Blood Soul Temple. Now this thing had done something even more inconceivable. It had actually used the demonic barrier in Jin Tong's mind to condense his energy and form the shadow of Her Majesty Empress Wu. Using my heart's demon to kill me. This method is truly marvelous. What a monster. Jin Tong spoke, but he wasn't angry. Instead he was happy. He laughed loudly. In the end, Luo Nan is still a junior. She saw that I had broken through her domain and was about to attack. She was worried, so she ordered the human-faced arachnid to forcefully extract her blood energy. This caused the demon within her body to transform into a demon outside of the martial monarch's form. Perhaps this would have been a brilliant move against the mental side. But I am a fleshly extraordinary who slaughtered my way out of a pile of corpses. Do you really think that I, your father, lost to the martial monarch, can't even beat her shadow? Amidst his loud laughter, electricity coiled around Jin Tong's body. He rebuked the clouds. Very good. As long as I can slay the martial monarch's demonic shadow, it is the same as slaying the flaw in my own mind. I will cut off future troubles. Even if I lose a great deal of blood essence, I will still have gained. When the time comes, I will regain my freedom and open a new world. Jin Tong's laughter had yet to fade away when the stimulating power of the metal headband increased for the third time. He didn't hold back at all. He no longer cared about the injuries on his body. He operated with all his might, pushing the transformation of his body and soul to the limit. It was as if he was still in a state of being aided by the gods. The more painful it was, the clearer it was. Aha! Jin Tong launched an attack at the shadow of the greatest enemy of his life, and the martial monarch's demonic shadow advanced noiselessly. The two sides clashed, colliding dozens of times in an instant. Then electricity scattered in all directions and the magnetic field collapsed. Jin Tong spat out a mouthful of blood and his chest almost collapsed. He had suffered a fatal blow from the martial monarch's demonic shadow, but he cracked a smile. He counterattacked amidst his smile. It was no longer the imposing electricity, but the purest straight punch. His long arm was like a sword as it pierced into the martial monarch's demonic shadow's chest. I'll learn from you. Once the wondrous meaning was felt, the inside and outside became bright. A speck of spiritual light shone through the universe. Jin Tong laughed loudly. He was about to take advantage of the situation and break the domain's embryonic form in one fell swoop, but his laughter suddenly became hoarse. It was also a straight finger. It passed through the martial monarch's demonic shadow, which had already begun to collapse, and pierced his extended arm into his chest. Wherever it hit, the blood coagulated and then spoiled. His internal organs accumulated fluid and rotted in the blink of an eye. His body decayed and his white bones were exposed. Moreover, it spread throughout his entire body at an astonishing speed. One finger destroyed his entire body's vitality. Jin Tong's expression froze. He could only watch helplessly as his own body decayed. He no longer had the power to reverse the situation. The one who caused all of this was a thin, malnourished figure. At this moment he was right in front of Jin Tong. He slightly leaned to the side, letting Jin Tong's stiff straight arm pass by. His eyes were tranquil and nearly empty. Jin Tong had seen this figure before. Just today, before he entered Xia City, he confirmed his most important objective once more. 16 billion in wealth, 2/1000 of the shares, and the authority that was closest to the apex of the world. Jin Tong's eyes widened. He wanted to reach out and grab it, but that figure dissolved like mist, leaving no trace behind. The Blood Soul Temple shook. The clouds hung low in the sky and bloody light surged. Jin Tong's mostly decayed body was on the altar. His feet had already sunk into the altar. It was not accurate to say that he had sunk. It was more appropriate to say that he had dissolved. Chapter 5:15. Xia City time, December 9th, around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The Coastal Defense Forces stationed in Xia City received an offshore detection alert. A regional magnetic explosion had occurred in a certain region of the sea. Although it didn't directly affect normal production and life, it could cause interference to the mutant life forms in the nearby region. Although it was already the end of the year and the astronomical great tides had subsided, the Coastal Defense Forces still didn't dare to lower their guard due to the turmoil in Xia City. They had been upgraded to the 3rd level of combat readiness. 5 minutes later, the drone took off and arrived at the target sea area 20 minutes later. The high-definition camera carried by the drone captured the most dangerous and eye-catching elements of this region with practically no difficulty. When the staff responsible for command, surveillance, and control saw the deathly white and cold region, the entire Coastal Defense Forces command center was unexpectedly silent. The sound of the drone's wings rippled across the sea. Tianbang and Zhangji's armed helicopter arrived in this region of the sea almost at the same time as the drone. It circled in the air above. The scene they saw with their naked eyes was more realistic, more chilly, and more impactful than what the command center saw through the camera. On the undulating waves of the sea, a hill over 15 meters tall quietly floated. The vast majority of its structure was deathly white and soaked in the color of deathly stillness. It was simply formed from countless bone fragments pieced together. Broken bones and sharp stubble crisscrossed and crisscrossed, vividly distinguishable. The white bones were like a mountain floating in the sea. The doors on both sides of the helicopter were open. Zhangji occupied one side. The sea breeze and the turbulence from the helicopter's wings assaulted her face. She didn't know when, but she held her breath. She just subconsciously controlled the hovering camera to circle around this white bone hill. She took close-up and long-distance shots without end. The satellite network didn't care about the cost. The clear images were transmitted back to the live broadcast room and into the eyes of over 20,000 people. For the time being, Zhangji didn't care what kind of repercussions such a scene would cause. After the initial period of shock, she was finally able to analyze more things from this white bone hill. She noticed that the skeletons on top of the white bone hill were all thick fish bones. Occasionally there would be bird bones mixed in. The components should be the life forms of the surrounding seas, and 99% of them were mutants. The problem was, the color of the bones was awe-inspiring like new. But what about the flesh and blood? Was it scraped clean? Or was it eaten away by something in a short period of time? The unrestrained imagination was even more chilling than the bones in front of him. And under the mountain of bones, there was a special component that didn't match the whole thing. It was a half-tilted dual-purpose airship. Its body was twisted and deformed, and there were traces of fire in some areas, but they were also covered by hills of white bones. It was precisely because of the existence of this ship that the dense bone mound obtained enough buoyancy to float on the sea surface. Zhangji shifted the camera and scanned the ship. Finally, it locked onto the ship's number and name. Gold accumulation. Xianxia scanned through the information in her head, and her breathing became a little stifled. This is the transport vehicle of the 5-metal hunting group. From the looks of it, they might have been completely wiped out. She didn't get a response from Tianbang. It wasn't just because of the noise from inside and outside the helicopter. In fact, ever since they arrived in this area, Tianbang, who had always liked to joke around and take advantage of others, was surprisingly quiet. At this time he just knocked on the headset, signaling the pilot to come closer. When the helicopter was almost directly above the White Bone Mountain, Tianbang, who was at the other side of the hatch, jumped down without any warning and landed on the top of the White Bone Mountain. The top was relatively flat, and the entire White Bone Mountain seemed to be pieced together casually, but it was surprisingly sturdy. The entire White Bone Mountain didn't move at all even after Tianbang jumped down. There was such a thing. Seeing this, Xianxia also wanted to jump down, but just as she moved, she saw Tianbang waving at her, stopping her. Was there any danger up there? If it was just danger, Xianxia wouldn't care. But on top of the White Bone Mountain, Tianbang's expression was unprecedentedly stern and grave. It directly stopped Xianxia from challenging his patience. In the next moment, Xianxia saw the format of fire outside Tianbang's body. He reached out with his arm, but this time he was absorbing the seawater below the White Bone Mountain. The undulating sea surface was like a dragon sucking in water, and a whirlpool formed. A stream of water directly rose up and went straight to the top of the White Bone Mountain. Another stream of water flowed from bottom to top, submerging the bottom of the White Bone Mountain and the foundation of the ship. The seawater rose and fell, instantly washing the White Bone Mountain. On the mountain, the cracks in the bones and the holes in between had water flowing up and down. What was Tianbang doing? Xianxia didn't understand. There were countless ability users watching the live broadcast right now, and they had the same thoughts as Xianxia. However, Luonan didn't care about their discussions and debates in the live broadcast room, the forums, the chat group, and various other channels. Luonan was sitting in the waiting area of Xia City's administrative hall right now. Since it was Sunday, most departments weren't working. There weren't many people here. Qin Ikuan, who was in charge of security, was very idle. He held a flexible screen and watched the live broadcast. The display showed the White Bone Mountain in the open sea, as well as the trajectory of the surging water. Luonan only scanned it twice, closed his eyes, and pondered over his own matters. He was a participant, the leader, and the manipulator of this entire situation. He was also the true winner of today's bountiful profits. Even though it had been some time since the matter, he still needed to calm his mind and straighten out his subsequent train of thought. Yes, he had used his own various resources to successfully behead Jin Tong. This was an amazing accomplishment. And the core thing that allowed him to realize this accomplishment was the altar frame that he and the Wraith Sign had constructed together. It could be called the Beast Fighting Arena. In the marvelous space constructed by the order frame of formatting theory, Luonan was the controller. He had always been playing a game of balance where there were gains and losses, Luonan had experienced something similar before. At the time, the Wraith Sign and Ruewen had exchanged pointers on the altar. They had risen in level at the same time, ultimately prompting the awakening of Ruewen's supernatural powers. Another time, the Wraith Sign had crossed space to confront the human-faced arachnid of the Order of Justice. Through these two experiences, Luonan had a general understanding of the operating rules of the altar. As long as one maintained self-will here, one would be able to borrow the power of the sacrificial offering to ascend and break through. One was bound to gain something here. But at the same time, those who stepped onto the altar were sacrificing themselves in order to comply with the ultimate rule. The winner takes all. The loser withered and perished. And relative to the rules, the only people who had special privileges were Luonan and the Wraith Sign. The Wraith Sign was the provider of the altar frame. It possessed the most cunning instinct to utilize the rules. Even if it failed, it could find a scapegoat. The Wraith Sign was the one. Luonan was the controller and supporter of the altar frame. Naturally, he surpassed the Wraith Sign. He was the one. But for now, Luonan was a person with special privileges. He was still fumbling with his own rights. He profited from this and received offerings, but he could not determine victory or defeat between the sacrificers. Right now, the only thing he could control was deciding what the sacrificers could offer and what they couldn't offer. what they could obtain and what they couldn't obtain. For example, though I know your pockets are rich, I don't want money. I only want your fingers. I also know that you are very hungry, but I won't give you food. Instead, I will gift you with beautiful clothes. And so on. Luo Nan was adjusting throughout the entire battle. He constantly increased the consumption of Jin Tong's flesh and blood according to Jin Tong's state. This allowed Jin Tong's thoughts to grow clearer and clearer, but it also consumed a great deal of mental energy. He maintained the balance of the rules of the altar, but he imposed the imbalance of demands onto Jin Tong's body. From this, he controlled the overall situation. Of course, the most fundamental rule of the altar was that the winner takes all. If Jin Tong really made it through this hurdle, Luo Nan would have no way of stopping him from soaring to the heavens. In reality, one really couldn't underestimate the wisdom and accumulation of any extraordinary. Jin Tong really was going to succeed in the end. However, Rui Wen appeared just in time. Jin Tong's spiritual awareness broke through the barrier, and his flesh and energy were completely exhausted. She dealt a fatal blow. Everything that Jin Tong had was completely obtained by the side that Luo Nan supported. Right now, the bright imprint that came from Jin Tong's body was climbing up the mountain of the Blood Soul Temple. It passed through the stone forest and the lava lake. Even though the strange energy was melted away, it was unharmed. It passed through the courtyard and the garden. Though the shepherd's imprint was left behind, it did not stop this object. Then there was the third level of the cave. The stone statues of the mushed-mouth ape and Mo Lun were already placed here. This was also the place where Luo Nan could most easily mobilize his combat strength. However, the bright imprint didn't stop at all. It clearly didn't match this cave. This speck of wondrous bright light followed the shape of the mountain of the Blood Soul Temple, winding and lingering. It rose bit by bit along with the flowing lava all the way to the fourth level. When it reached the group of buildings that resembled temples and halls, it broke away from the flow of flames and entered this place. They were truly on completely different levels. Luo Nan more or less grasped some of the changes in the levels of the Blood Soul Temple. The first level of the Blood Soul Temple was the stone forest and the lava lake. It was a place to digest foreign strange energy. The second level was the stone garden. The shepherd's imprint was stored there. It could barely be considered a place for guests. This was because the few members of the Blood Flame Order had yet to complete the construction of the Blood Soul Temple. It was not easy to control them. Who would have thought that Luo Nan possessed the power of hell in this world? He borrowed the control of the human-faced arachnid to forcefully take down the Blood Soul Temple. As for the third level of the cave, looking at the stone statues of the mushed-mouth ape and the Mo Lun stone, it should be used to store the imprint of the architect. The fourth level of the temple hall was confirmed to be used to place the imprint of extraordinaries. Jin Tong was the first resident of this place. Then the fifth level was given to the legendary Blood Flame Will. Next was the sixth step, which was the internalization of the Blood Flame Will. What was to be done? Luo Nan was unable to analyze the deeper level of theory for a time. He discovered that the temple hall of the fourth level had a complex structure with courtyards arranged in rows. In fact, the inside was completely empty. Jin Tong's bright imprint entered this place and arrived at a hall to the left. There was a vague structure of rooms and the like outside the hall. But that was all. Luo Nan thought back to the cave on the third level. There were several faceless stone statues. He just needed to wait for the imprint to connect and fill the place with bloody light. Then there would be a supernatural phenomenon. However, there were no statues within the hall of the fourth level. Everything within the rooms was empty. The bright imprint was located in the center of the hall. It was lonely and pitiful. Chapter 5:16. In the fierce battle with Jin Tong, the two puppets in the grotto had put in a lot of effort. The mushed-mouth ape had been killed 7 times in a row. If he were to change his name every time he died, he would be called Yuanjiu now. There was also Mo Lun. He had been killed twice and could now be called Mo Lun III. The successive resurrection of the puppets indeed brought a great deal of consumption to Jin Tong, but it was not without a price. Of these two puppets, the rotten-mouth ape used his own kind as a base, while Mo Lun used Gang Xiong to transform them with a single shot. After the puppet was formed, the cost of forging it again was reduced, but that was only relatively speaking. The mountain of bones in the outer seas of Xia City was proof of this. The reserves that the Blood Soul Temple had accumulated over the past few days had been completely used up in order to support their consumption. The human-faced arachnid had borrowed the power of the Jin Tong to stir up a powerful electromagnetic field. It was also a soul-sucking lure. It had practically slaughtered all the sea creatures within a radius of 200 kilometers. Only then was it able to barely support the Blood Soul Temple. Oh, there were also those unlucky bastards from the Five Metals hunting group. Actually, if Jin Tong could calm his mind a bit, or if he could kill the mushed-mouth ape and Mo Luan a bit more fiercely and quickly, he could kill 2 more rounds of the human-faced arachnid before it could successfully transform into an external demon. Then perhaps Luo Nan really would have lost all of his corrosive light. Victory and defeat were separated by a thin line. However, the person who replayed the battle could only be the one who was alive. No matter how difficult it was for Luo Nan to win, no matter how distressed he was right now, these were all treatments that only the victor could enjoy. Now the golden tree essence chi that the altar frame had seized should be divided equally between Rui Wen and the Blood Soul Temple. However, with Rui Wen's unique ability to assimilate her body and soul, she had no interest in these foreign impurities. She did not accept them at all, which benefited the Blood Soul Temple. The problem was that in the level of a closed system, the Blood Soul Temple really did not have the capital to monopolize it. A portion of it would be transferred to the Wraith Sign to enjoy, and the Wraith Sign would divide out a portion to offer to Luo Nan. Most of the resources used by the Bloody Soul Temple were used to build the Path of Blood and Fire. Currently, the altar at the summit had just been built, and the first 5 stages of the Bloody Soul Temple had been completed. There wasn't much left. The Blood Soul Temple was still continuously converting the impurities from the outside world to replenish their losses. The whirlpool in the lava lake in the stone forest was surging, it was chaotic. However, even if one could only enter the first 2 floors but not leave, the majority of the blood-red light was intercepted by the 3rd floor. Luo Nan watched the 2 stone puppets absorb the bloody light in an unending stream, while the 4th floor was only able to get some leftovers. This level of authority was messed up. He had originally wanted to interfere and see what kind of abnormality Jin Tong's bright light mark would produce. But after careful observation and evaluation, if the mark of light was to be completely enriched, the current amount of blood light energy would not be enough, even if it was multiplied by 10. Based on the situation of the cave puppets, it had at least 70 to 80% of Jin Tong's combat power at its peak, so the energy reserves needed were naturally massive. Unless he killed another transcendent. Go to hell. Luo Nan suppressed this dangerous thought to the bottom of his heart for the time being. He couldn't help but think, what would happen if I went hunting? The wilderness, the ocean, or the cloud world? Luo Nan felt a bit delighted. It was hard not to have such thoughts after beheading an extraordinary of the 100 Greats level. But very quickly a phone call suppressed his emotional water level by a lot. The call was from Emoya. She asked immediately, "Are you okay? Why wasn't he at the charity hall? Where are you, the police station?" "I'm fine. I'm fine." Only now did Luo Nan recall that the St. Mary's Church Hospital was one of the many murder sites reported by the Xia City Police. It was only a wall away from the charity hall they were at last night. No wonder Emoya exploded in anger. Based on this deduction, wasn't his attitude a little too calm today? Luo Nan felt that it was a bit inappropriate, but he couldn't change it for the time being. He could only answer honestly, "We're currently at the South City Administration Hall doing the procedures. Today is Sunday. Something happened at the charity hall. It's not good to stay any longer, so I asked someone to." Luo Nan pondered as he lied. Was this reason really useful? "I'm coming." "Hey, it's all over." "Hey." The other side had already hung up. Luo Nan couldn't help but sigh. Rui Wen's procedures were more or less done at this time. Could it be that he was still waiting here for Emoya to come over? Rui Wen, dressed in a simple t-shirt and cowboy attire, walked out from a compartment in the administration hall right as he was thinking. She was expressionless out of habit. Gauda followed closely by her side. As for the middle-aged man who was 2 steps behind her, he was a deputy chief of the Xia City SCA branch office. His surname was Hu. He had been requested by He Yuan to be appointed by the Xia City SCA branch office. He had rushed over specifically to help with the relevant business. As a high-ranking member of the SCA, this deputy chief who possessed a clearer understanding of the inner world. His information was updated quite promptly, and he didn't lack the proper attitude. Perhaps it was because of this that he was selected by the bureau to come over. Look at his expression. In any case, it wasn't natural. After all, the previous person in charge of this business, the person who had arranged for Luo Nan's group to be sent to the St. Mary's Charity Hall, was currently in the police freezer with his 9 companions, waiting to be cremated. Quantum Corporation was responsible for all funeral expenses. Spending people's money. Helping people block disasters. It was nothing more than this. Rui Wen didn't say a word. She walked to Luo Nan's side and stood there quietly. Whether it was the SCA's deputy chief Hu or Qin Yikun and Gauda, who were responsible for Luo Nan and Rui Wen's safety, none of them discovered that this thin, quiet, stunted girl had disappeared for 3 seconds half an hour ago. She had floated back after killing an extraordinary. In reality, even though Luo Nan had seen everything from start to finish and had even helped guide and locate her, he was still in a dream right now. Luo Nan smiled at Rui Wen and bowed to express his thanks to Deputy Chief Hu. Thank you, Chief Hu, for your help. He just spoke a few simple words of courtesy. He didn't really understand much else. Luckily, Deputy Chief Hu was quite slick. He chuckled and said, "You're welcome. You're welcome. According to Mr. Luo's request, this child's relationship has been transferred to the Forestwall District's Lawn Town Welfare Institute. Both sides are fine. Once the procedures are completed, we can handle the adoption procedures." Deputy Chief Hu was clearly playing dumb. He did his best to distance himself from the 16 billion or 0.02%. He did his best to control his gaze and not meet Rui Wen's. Luo Nan was well aware of this, but he ignored it. The so-called Lawn Town Welfare Institute was the one overseen by the Dean of Myriad Pagoda. Luo Nan had Rui Wen transfer her relationship there because this was the only place Luo Nan knew of. The Xia City branch didn't have a similar organization, so it was inconvenient to operate. Of course, it was just a name. Luo Nan would still keep Rui Wen by his side in the future. He couldn't let her go to the Welfare Institute. Luo Nan had a very good impression of the Dean of Myriad Pagoda, but this was a terrifying temptation on the level of 16 billion. Using unnecessary tests to measure a person's heart was really a very unnecessary and foolish action. Luo Nan had already notified the Dean of Myriad Pagoda before this. He would soon start the adoption procedures for Rui Wen. It was just that it was impossible for him to do this with his age. He needed to obtain the consent of his aunt and uncle. Emoya had left last night in order to get some information. He just didn't know what the results were. Luo Nan's mind wandered a bit as he thought about it. He was destined to be absolutely not a good person to chat with. He easily turned the topic cold. Deputy Chief Hu's mood was a bit complicated. He wanted to stay far away from Luo Nan due to his safety instincts, but he also wanted to befriend Luo Nan. Luo Nan pressed his ear while he was in a dilemma. "Excuse me. I need to take a call." Deputy Chief Hu hurriedly said, "Just do what you need to do." Luo Nan nodded toward him and connected to the hex ear. Papercut was contacting him through voice. Papercut first asked about Rui Wen's situation in the beginning, and Luo Nan didn't hide anything from him. Papercut was a bit shocked. "You're really going to adopt her? They're putting all the pressure on you." "There's no difference. It's just a matter of time." Luo Nan already had a realization. A huge business deal of 16 billion would make the vast majority of people in the world go crazy. Those greedy people would be like mad dogs, searching for any opportunity to take a bite. Then they would bite down without letting go. Once Luo Nan stood on the stage, even if it was just his silhouette, he would be picked up by them sooner or later. Hiding, concealing, shifting, and the like would no longer have any meaning in the future. He would no longer have any fate with the so-called low profile. Luo Nan chatted for a bit and suddenly felt strange. "Brother Papercut, you're quite well informed. I just finished the procedures over here." Papercut laughed. "I'm with Dean Wan. Are you coming over in a bit?" "Huh. What's up?" Luo Nan really didn't have this plan today. He had already made an appointment with He Yuan. Once Rui Wen's matters were settled, they would seriously discuss the security upgrade plan for him, Rui Wen, and his family. However, it felt quite strange for Papercut, who had nothing to do with Dean Wan, to appear at the orphanage. Papercut went straight to the point when Luo Nan asked, "It's because of the matter with old Shai. His situation is a bit strange right now. Can you come over and take a look?" "Worker Shai? That's right. I heard that not long after you left last night he seemed to have thought of something. He stayed outside in the rain for an entire night, ignoring everyone. It was that kid Di Weiwu who called me." Papercut sent Luo Nan a video. Luo Nan skimmed it a few times, but he didn't actually watch it seriously. This was because he could observe things through a more intuitive form. His thoughts stirred and he followed the outline of the soul cloak. He crossed a distance of nearly 100 kilometers and arrived at the Orchid Town orphanage in the Forest Wall district. At this moment, worker Zhai was not in the orphanage. Instead, he was sitting by the roadside outside. There was a relatively regular stone under his butt, and his body was like a statue as he stared blankly at the freezing rain that was falling from the gaps between the buildings. In front of worker Zhai, the abandoned driveway that ran through the River Wu district, Forest Wall district, and Trigate district was already covered in thin ice. The bandits on the road had also quietened down. Luo Nan frowned as he observed worker Zhai for a moment. His initial judgment was that worker Zhai was in a state that seemed to be calm yet wasn't. It was a bit like an epiphany. The breadth and depth of worker Zhai's processing of information should have increased. Dean Wan and I both feel that old Zhai has entered some sort of state of enlightenment. However, it's hard to say what he's comprehending. This is a matter of the spiritual domain. You're an expert and you've been close to Jia Yunxing recently. Do you have any guesses? When did I become an expert? Luo Nan shook his head. Actually, he already had a general understanding of what was going on. Moreover, he could solve the problem right now. However, doing this would be too shocking and it might expose his trump card. I'd better go there. Chapter 517. Oh yeah, you must have been racing. Luo Nan looked at the time. Even if the South City District Administrative Hall wasn't that far away from the Santa Maria Charity Hall, it was a bit too exaggerated for him to have arrived so soon after hanging up the phone. I'll be there in a bit. Luo Nan gave Papercut a reply first, then he hung up temporarily. He waved his hand at Emoya. As soon as he raised his hand, he regretted it. Speaking of which, from last night until now, he had stirred up a storm in the city and killed so many people that his eyes were bloodshot. He had not considered anything else. Speaking of which, Emoya wasn't someone who could be easily dealt with just a random excuse. He seemed to have exposed too many flaws during this period of time. But at this stage, there was no point in confessing anything other than making his family worried. But on the other hand, if the situation did not improve, it would not be a good thing for the family to not be vigilant. At the end of the day, this was a dilemma. It was his impulsive decision to accept Rui Wen's burden, but he was unable to resolve the repercussions. This was the inevitable result. Fortunately, the fruit wasn't ripe yet. There was still room for development. He didn't have much time to think. Emoya arrived in a few steps. It must be said that Emoya was originally a super clothes rack. After entering the commercial company, her current attire was even more like that of a celebrity. She wore a punk-style motorcycle leather jacket on her body and wore sunglasses. She looked extremely cool and dashing. However, Luo Nan knew very well that the hard-soled boots she was wearing were very painful to kick. This was clearly just an outfit for the convenience of fighting. However, Emoya actually let out a sigh of relief after seeing Luo Nan and Ray when both standing in the hall, safe and sound. Perhaps she had been too worried and on edge, so she lost her energy here. Or perhaps she had to pay attention to maintaining a bit of her image in front of Rui Wen. She just took off her sunglasses and used them to nod at Luo Nan. You need to greet me in the future. Otherwise, how would I know if you're the one in the corpse bag that's being carried out? Luo Nan chuckled and gave an irrelevant answer. You came really fast. Of course. The rioters blew up a building just 2 or 3 blocks away from the Hall of Mercy. There's not even a ghost on the streets now. Don't you know? I know, but I had already left by then. It's only 4 blocks away from that building. What else could Luo Nan say? He could only smile. Fortunately, at this time Rui Wen attracted his attention. Emoya took great pity on this silent, thin and weak child. She laughed as she bypassed Luo Nan to touch Rui Wen's cheek. You didn't get scared, did you? It'll be much easier to stay at home in the future. While the little guy's skin is so good. This was not the first time Emoya sighed with emotion. With Rui Wen's special innate talent of body and soul merging, her entire body was pure and translucent, almost inhuman. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that she was spotless, and that her skin was like jade. Even with a magnifying glass, one wouldn't be able to find any flaws. It was useless for Emoya to be envious of him. Luo Nan was still worried. If Rui Wen wasn't used to Emoya's intimate actions and disappeared into thin air in a flash, That would be quite awkward. Fortunately, Ruiwen was very calm and could even be said to be very obedient. She allowed Emoya to fiddle with her, but her eyes were always fixed on this woman who was a head taller than her. It seemed that she was observing her and perhaps even a little curious. This is a good start. In the end, Emoya was still a semi-professional who raised a younger brother at home. She wasn't blindly unrestrained and passionate. After expressing enough goodwill towards Ruiwen, she continued to close the distance from a new angle. Let me see. The wristband is already fitted. The SCA is the most active at times like this. Have you added me as a friend yet? Come. I'll be the first. Perhaps it was because she was stained with the blood of the Luo family, but Emoya was quite accomplished when it came to acting as if no one else was present. Deputy Bureau Chief, who was a bit embarrassed, to the side. He subconsciously coughed. He was a bit confused about the relationship between Luo Nan and Emoya. At first he thought that they were ability users or friends or lovers, but then he felt that it wasn't the case. They were most likely brother and sister. But why do I feel that it's a bit weird? Deputy Bureau Chief, who faintly felt that he had grasped something, but he couldn't make it clear for a time. Right when he was in a daze, he heard Emoya introduce her communicator number to Ruiwen. Oh, this is my name. Emoya. If you want to chat with me, just tap on it. Voice control is fine too. Emoya. Deputy Bureau Chief, who was still under a lot of pressure. His mind was a bit absent-minded. He subconsciously said this name. Emoya turned her head in a daze. You are. Who? Uncle who? Emoya never thought that she would bump into someone she knew here. Moreover, this person's identity was quite sensitive. She was also stunned for a moment. Fortunately, she reacted quickly. She recalled the surname of this middle-aged man and greeted him. She felt that she was a generation lower than him. She had no choice. This deputy bureau chief, who was in the same Xia City SCA branch as her father. Even though they weren't under the same command, they were still on the same level. She had met him a few times during the internal family parties of the branch. She had even been half-truthfully mentioned as a partner. Oh my, it seemed that her mouth had been slapped just now. Emoya pondered in her mind, but her face had a brilliant smile. Uncle who, why are you here? Aren't you resting today? Hee hee. Deputy Bureau Chief, who only knew how to laugh dryly for a time. His mind was a bit muddled in that instant. He looked at Emoya, then he looked at Luonan. Finally, through a certain nerve in his brain, he connected the two domains that didn't belong to each other. He connected the two siblings before him together. Bullshit authority of the inner world. Within a second, Deputy Bureau Chief, who had cordially greeted the 18 generations of the ancestors of a certain big shot in the system who had decided to isolate the authority information system of the secular world and the inner world. He had severed the mapping relationship. He had also given an important explanation on the family relationships of this big shot. Did the PR company of the inner world cheat on your wife? Otherwise, why would they come up with such an idea that would even clog up the Photoshop? In this moment, Deputy Bureau Chief, who recalled the flying shuttle that crashed near the SA office building this morning. Extending his line of thought a bit further, he suddenly had a reasonable explanation for the 4 unidentified deaths in the machine-operated cafeteria of the Bible Corporation, the wife of a certain high-ranking employee of their branch. Of course, he would never forget that the entire leadership had worked overtime and been on standby since last night. They had quickly pulled out a long death list. What was even more bullshit was that they couldn't do anything under the influence of powerful figures in the military and government. Deputy Bureau Chief, whose originally pale face faded even more. He noticed that Emoya's gaze had already turned a bit doubtful. And the expression of that damned ancestor next to her was a bit unkind. What the hell was this? Deputy Bureau Chief, who used his decades of ruthless work experience to instantly deduce the most likely relationship state between this pair of siblings and their family. Then a smile blossomed on his face. Oh. It really is you, Emoya. You're a big star now. Then this is the one from the Hai Heng family. He was a bit at a loss for words for a time. Luckily, he quickly pulled back his mask and turned his gaze to Luonan. He continued to chuckle. So it's the child of the Hai Heng family. I remember that you're my nephew, right? We've met before, but you were too young back then. You were also very shy. I didn't recognize you at all today. If I had known about this relationship earlier, I wouldn't have needed Mr. Gao to introduce me. You could have just told Hai Heng to let me know. Luo Nan blinked and put on a smile. I'm sorry, Uncle Hu. I'm sorry about what happened just now. I was young back then, so I didn't remember it clearly. I didn't dare greet you. The two began to chuckle together. The atmosphere was quite harmonious. However, Mo Ye's gaze cut back and forth between the two's faces a few times. Her meaning was very clear. Are you King kidding me? It must be said that Deputy Chief, who was a veteran actor. This bit of improvisation shouldn't have been a problem for him. However, his condition today really wasn't that great. His performance was a bit stiff. As for Luo Nan, there was no need to even mention him. Deputy Chief, who also knew that saying too much would only lead to more mistakes. He puffed out his belly and laughed. The matter has been settled. We've gotten to know each other again. Originally, I should be treating you guys to a meal as an elder. Oh, the timing isn't right. I still have some things to do over there. I'll find some time later. Having said this, he braced himself and revealed a smile towards the legendary 2000s of a girl. This little fellow is quite clever. Your family has gained another piece of good fortune. Hold on. If I say these words, won't someone think that I'm mocking him? Deputy Chief, who felt that he already didn't know how to speak. Luckily, Mo Ye had a certain standard when it came to the ways of the world. She immediately smiled and bowed. This is all thanks to your help, Uncle Hu. My family will definitely hold a feast to thank you later. Please do come. He. Deputy Chief, who made up his mind. He was going to leave Xia City right now. He was going to book a plane ticket immediately. It didn't matter where he was going. Even in a state of emergency, a leader should theoretically be on duty 24 hours a day. But wouldn't it be fine if he gave up his year-end bonus this year? Mo Ye watched Deputy Chief Hu walk out of the administrative hall in a hurry. She gazed at Luo Nan, then her gaze swept over Qin Yikuan and Gauda. She suddenly smiled. Excellent. As the saying goes, a scholar who has been away for 3 days must be looked at in a new light. My boy, your current social circle is quite spectacular. Go back and tell Mom. She'll definitely be very happy. The corner of Luo Nan's eye twitched. I'm in high school after all. Mo Ye lowered her voice a bit. Really? You've put down your previous work? You don't have any problems with your funds, right? Luo Nan was stupefied when faced with the biggest benefactor of his life. But he could only shake his head right now. He understood in his heart that it wouldn't be that easy to get through this time. Who knew that Mo Ye would raise an eyebrow and change the topic? The procedures are done. Are you going home? I'm going to take Rui Wen to the orphanage to perfect the procedures. Do you want to come with me? Luo Nan took the initiative to invite her, but Mo Ye unexpectedly refused. She put on her sunglasses and shook her head. I have a schedule tonight. I should go meet up. You guys just pay attention to your safety. No problem. The group of people walked out of the administrative hall like this. Mo Ye had just bought a red sports car a few days ago. She smiled as she gave Rui Wen a light hug. Then she nodded goodbye to Qin Yikuan and Gauda before getting into the car. The car window slid down. Only now did she hook her hand at Luo Nan. Luo Nan walked forward and bent down to look at her. Mo Ye's eyes stared over from behind her sunglasses. I've always believed that people without ideals are trash worse than dogs. But don't make me regret supporting you. Luo Nan was silent for a second before spitting out a word. I won't. Her voice was faint, but it was clear and distinct within the classic rumbling noise of the sports car's engine. Chapter 518. The jeep started moving. It first headed south, circled around the Huanhai Highway, and headed toward the Western Forest Wall District. Luo Nan received Mo Ye's reminder in the car. He gave his aunt a call. The outside world was in a state of chaos. He had to report that he was safe no matter what. The call didn't last long. It ended after a minute or two. Everything was normal on the phone, but Luo Nan couldn't help but stroke his brows. He didn't know when his brows had become knotted. It must be known that the entirety of Xia City was under the surveillance of his soul cloak. Luo Nan poured his thoughts into it, and no changes in the situation at home could be hidden from his eyes. Luo Nan's aunt and uncle were sitting in the living room at home right now. The two were silent. Luo Shuqing had been fiddling with the wristband on her wrist the entire time after the call ended. Her expression could be described as calm or repressed. She wasn't as calm as she appeared on the phone. As for Luo Nan's uncle Mo Haiheng, he was sitting to the side. He was hugging his stupid black and thick mobile workstation, operating it. He even had an electronic cigarette in his mouth. Steam rose and it made a sizzling sound. This scene made Luo Nan think of the time when he eavesdropped on Luo Nan's uncle and aunt's conversation. They nmo ya. Where did their train of thought go? Luo Nan spoke subconsciously. He didn't want to hear an answer. He just wanted to calm his emotions a bit. Qin Ikuan, who was next to him, thought seriously for a moment. He replied, "From Miss Mo Ya's behavior, perhaps she believes that your research results have been sold for a good price, or that you have a very powerful investor." Luo Nan was stunned for a moment. He turned his head. Qin Ikuan spoke softly, "The research of supernatural powers has made quite a bit of progress in recent years. It also represents a certain trend. Therefore, there has always been a lot of active capital in the outer circles of the inner world. They will always set their eyes on some projects with potential. They will use all kinds of methods to invest in relationships in an attempt to get a share of the pie. Of course, once capital is injected, whether ability users or capital is the leader will depend on the specific situation and analysis." Luo Nan went, "Oh." Qin Ikuan's words reminded him of something similar. Octopus and Cragburst had told him about this before. Octopus had yet to finalize his latest thesis, but a pharmaceutical company had already come knocking on his door. They wished to jointly develop relevant targeted drugs. It was said that the VM agreement was quite considerable. In this sense, it was not impossible to say that Luo Nan's research results could be sold for a good price. This is a good reason. Luo Nan was a bit moved. If he could do more research on this and gradually transfer his situation in the inner world, it would not be a problem. Instead of letting the family's imagination run wild, it was better to guide them in a controllable direction. In any case, uncle and aunt's acceptance of this matter should be better than ordinary people who had no concept. He asked for Qin Ikuan's opinion. "Brother Qin, what do you think about the topic research on targeting drugs based on formatting theory? Do you think it will work if you use it to attract investments?" Qin Ikuan shook his head. "I'm a layman." Luo Nan grew excited. "I think it's quite reliable. Actually, there are projects. Brother Octopus's progress is quite good already. I can ask Sister Yuan to help draft up a plan later." As Luo Nan's accumulated power was released layer by layer and soared all the way, he already possessed a prominent position in the inner world. He also possessed the corresponding right to speak. All right. Perhaps it was his companions at the Xia City branch who were flattering him. But Luo Nan felt that the matter of pushing out a genuine formatting theory and giving his grandfather a proper name could be put on the agenda in the near future. Formatting theory itself had all sorts of problems. Yuan had warned that formatting theory deviated greatly from the mainstream research direction of the world. But Luo Nan, a living example, would attract a portion of people to join in the research of formatting theory and form new results. It must be known that Luo Nan would certainly be one of the most eye-catching focal points of the inner world for some time in the future, unless he was cleanly eliminated by someone. Brother Octopus was a successful example. Luo Nan hoped that hundreds and thousands of such examples would appear. In that case, his grandfather. Luo Nan's suddenly excited mood stopped for a moment. He couldn't help but think of the hospital's diagnosis of his grandfather's condition. He subconsciously used his soul cloak to roughly observe his grandfather's current situation. An old man who was already emaciated and deformed, was wrapped in a thick blanket in the hospital room. He sat on the bed and stared blankly at the pattering freezing rain outside. Luo Nan didn't know what this rain, this city, and this world looked like in his grandfather's eyes. The severe symptoms of schizophrenia caused everything before this old man's eyes to transform into the harshest and most realistic of illusions. In this unchangeable and distorted world, even the most rigorous rationality had to yield to the patient's instinctive feelings, creating absurd logic. Even for the patient, it was still rigorous and thorough. It was impeccable. Reality was just this sorrowful. Luo Nan's soul cloak gave him an astonishing range of perception, but it also made it impossible for him to avoid this reality. He didn't even have the chance to buffer. But perhaps it was because of the continuous advancement of his cultivation and the influence of his glorious battle achievements. Luo Nan had a marvelous confidence and premonition right now. Perhaps it was a misconception. In reality, this wasn't something that suddenly appeared. It had formed a long time ago. Just if If his grandfather always adhered to the logic of formatting theory, then perhaps the only person who could communicate with him would be Luonan himself. Even if he couldn't do it right now, sooner or later he would discover a docking window as his understanding and application of formatting theory deepened. Luonan had once thought of using a psychic's drawing to try it out, but now that he thought about it, it was quite unrealistic. Due to the aggravation of his schizophrenia, the heavens knew what the drawing looked like in his grandfather's eyes. Only by truly connecting their minds could that tiny bit of possibility be unearthed. Luonan turned his head to face Ray when his thoughts reached this point. It'll be a bit quieter in 2 days. I'll take you to see my grandfather. There's a new person in the family. I should at least let him know. Ruiwen listened quietly. She didn't say much. Luonan knew that she didn't refuse, and that was enough. Luonan let out a long breath and leaned back in his chair. He slightly closed his eyelids, but when he wanted to open them again he felt that they were strangely heavy. A deep black tide surged over in an instant, nearly engulfing him. He did his best to open his eyes twice, but he actually couldn't open them. He nearly wanted to fall asleep. But he was suddenly startled in his daze. He suddenly exerted strength and broke out in a layer of cold sweat. Only then did his drowsiness disappear a bit. Mr. Luo? Qin Ikuan noticed Luonan's mental state. He was a bit worried. You should sleep in the car for a bit. You haven't slept for nearly 40 hours. It's nothing. I was just thinking about something. Luonan told a completely unconvincing lie and said, open the car windows. Let some air in. This didn't quite meet the security requirements, but God, who sat in the driver's seat, still did as he was told. As the car windows were lowered, the air currents brought about by the high-speed travel, along with the freezing rain and cold air, surged in. This caused Luonan's mind to shake and quite a bit of his drowsiness disappeared. However, he understood very well that this was a temporary phenomenon. Not sleeping for 40 hours wasn't a reason for him to be sleepy. With his current level of cultivation and attainments, not sleeping for 4 days was no big deal. However, the current situation was different in the end. The root of everything was still the soul cloak that he had unfurled with all his strength. From Luonan's perspective, as long as the large production line of his closed system operated endlessly, the area covered by the soul cloak could endlessly expand outwards. The area covered by the soul cloak had already been pushed out nearly 600 kilometers, not counting the area on land. Moreover, it showed no signs of stopping. It was because of this that Luonan was able to accurately lock onto Jin Tong's position within the boundless ocean. He set up an ambush and killed this heavily injured extraordinary in the shortest amount of time possible. But the matter of expanding the range was the natural result of his closed system and his special interference method. It was just like stuffing things into a hard drive. The framework was there. It was a matter of course. Anyone could do it. However, to sort out a logic that ran through everything from beginning to end within a hard drive that was crammed full of information, and to perform efficient calculations in a timely manner, the difficulty had risen by more than a single level. In the cloud world, the range of Luonan's soul cloak's expansion was much vaster than in the cloud world. It was just that the environment there was relatively monotonous and the targets were limited. There was no need for any calculations at all. But in Xia City he needed to sort out and quickly process all sorts of information within this vast region. This included but was not limited to 20 transportation layers, 24 administrative districts, several dozen professional employment organizations, over 100 dangerous targets from the inner world, and countless dangerous nodes and locations. After all, no one knew when or how a fatal crisis would befall him or any of his loved ones. Luonan undoubtedly felt guilty for creating such a situation. This was no longer just a problem of energy and ability. It also included straightforward pressure and suppression. Luonan thought about the matters of his loved ones in his mind. A considerable portion of them were precisely the deformed embodiment of this pressure. Right now, the pressure was as great as a mountain, and the exhaustion of his mental strength was severe. But he needed to maintain a calm demeanor in front of others, especially Ruiwen. Otherwise, how could he display the responsibility he should have? However, these days could not continue for too long. Luonan intentionally diverted his attention in order to avoid being assaulted by his fatigue once more. His eyeballs swiveled and his gaze stopped at the front control screen. A video program was playing there. God had turned it on after getting in the car. God and Qin Ikun were both professionals. Their professional standards were extremely high. Normally, when they were driving and executing missions, they would not be distracted by other matters. But right now, they were paying attention to this program because it was relatively sensitive and closely related to the mission. Right now, the program was displaying a certain region in the outer seas of Xia City. The Hill of Bones was floating on the surface of the sea. Luonan had nothing to say. Is Xianxia still broadcasting live? Qin Yikuan answered. Right now she's only providing the live footage. The main point is still the analysis of the experts. God increased the volume of the program as he spoke, and he transmitted the image to the audio and video system in the back seats. Without the stimulating, immersive scene, the appeal of Xianxi's live broadcast would drop by over half. Right now they were faced with this extremely topical topic, but there was no straightforward answer to the Hill of Bones. It was the turn of the experts from all walks of life to step onto the stage and display their talent for nonsense. It was reasonable to say that the most important question was who created the Hill of Bones. However, a large portion of the energy of the experts from all walks of life wasn't focused on this. Instead, they were focused on the accumulating gold beneath the Hill of Bones. This dual-purpose ship possessed a very strong symbolic significance, especially when the search work continued. More and more corpses and remains of the members of the 5-metal hunting group were found in the surrounding seas. The topic of discussion inevitably pointed towards a most crucial point. The 5-metal hunting group was nearly completely annihilated. This was something that could already be confirmed. But had the true soul of the group, Jin Tong, already melted into this hill of bones? Not even his bones remained? Or did he rely on the inconceivable abilities of extraordinaries to avoid death? Whether he lived or died, whether he survived or perished. This determined the nature of this matter. Aside from this, even if the number of people who died was multiplied by 10, it still wouldn't have any decisive significance. And for the Xia City branch, the focus of their attention was different. Qin Yikuan spoke in a low voice, looking at the intelligence from the various airlines and various internal transportation points. I'm afraid that there will be a large number of people entering the country in the next few days. The intimidation generated by this live broadcast is lower than we expected. If Her Majesty Empress Wu could say. Qin Yikuan felt that it was useless to say anything more when he spoke to this point. He shook his head and shut his mouth. However, Luonan already understood what Qin Yikuan meant. He shook his head as well, but the meaning behind Qin Yikuan's words was quite different. 16 billion. 2 out of 1,000. The vast majority of people will be tempted. But the ones who are tempted and have the power to act will always be a small portion. Qin Yikuan found Luonan's words strange. The problem is that since these people have the power to act, they won't easily let go. If we can't stop this momentum, then it can only prove that we haven't killed enough of these fellows with the power to act. Qin Yikuan was speechless. Luonan's eyelids trembled slightly. He was still restrained by his drowsiness. His voice was a bit indistinct. A few days ago, I participated in Charlie and Tianlai's funerals. I thought through a problem. Since we are all part of a large network of social relationships, a certain lack will cause discomfort. People will habitually make an issue out of this network. Those people treat me like this. And if I want to counterattack, killing a few people will affect many more people. I will be exhausted from running for my life in the future. Brother Qin, don't you think this makes sense? Qin Yikuan was unable to respond. God looked over through the rearview mirror. This young genius in the eye of the storm. Has he finally revealed his worry? Luonan's drooping eyelids covered his pupils. It was impossible to see what he was thinking in the end. On the program, the rather die-hard faction and the rather lively faction were still arguing. If they could fight, the two sides would certainly beat the brains out of each other. Luonan could only think in this clamorous and lively atmosphere. Fortunately, there is a phenomenon in this world. It's called, birds of a feather flock together. The freezing rain fell without end. The infrastructure of the high-altitude stratum was good, but it was indifferent to this. However, the feeling of watching the rolling muddy water form a line in the recycling stratum as it fell from the sky wasn't that wonderful. According to statistics, 14 of the 24 administrative districts of Xia City possessed the recycling stratum. The Western City District and the 4 satellite cities had the most recycling stratum. This was because these places were the gates to the wilderness. They were also the sewage outlets that poured out the city's garbage, in various senses. At the same time, they were also the flow points of Grey Capital. Setting up a welfare home here was actually a very subtle matter. It was very easy for people to misunderstand. Those who knew the ropes would ask what the code of the dark web was. Those who were impatient would directly inquire about the price. But then again, even in the well-ordered South City district where the recycling stratum didn't exist, who knew how many crimes were hidden within the Santa Maria Charity Hall? From this aspect, Principal Juan Pagoda overseeing the Lawn Town Welfare Home had at least established a pure land. Luonan got off the car by the roadside outside the welfare home. Dean Juan, Papercut and the kid Di Weiwu were waiting at the entrance. Beside them was Worker Zhai, who was sitting upright and watching the rain. Worker Zhai's situation hadn't changed at all compared to what he had observed through the soul cloak. He was watching the rain, but he wasn't foolishly trying to see the rain as a flower. He had entered a state of selflessness, testing out his own ideas over and over again. That's right. Worker Zhai was endlessly sketching the condensation ring. He should have faintly discovered the subtle changes in the environment caused by the freezing rain. He hoped to borrow the interference scene constructed by the soul cloak to seize the opportunity to complete the condensation ring project. After all, the water molecules were sufficiently interfered with. They were exceptionally lively. It was different from being by the side of a pool or the surface of the sea. This pulsating rhythm was an extremely beneficial guide. Actually, the success rate of Worker Zhai's telepathic drawing was already extremely high. Occasionally, droplets of water would fly through the curtain of rain, showing the results of his hard work. However, these works were lacking by a thread compared to the semi-permanent structure Luonan spoke of, a stable carrier that carried the wonders of the interference between the mental and the material. This thread of difference was the most torturous. Since Luonan was the one who proposed the cultivation plan, he naturally had his own thoughts when faced with this situation. However, Papercut and Principal Juan Pagoda were both present, so he didn't act rashly. Instead, he asked for their opinions. The model you spoke of is reliable in theory, but it's lacking by a bit. Papercut also saw the doorway. He was a mental side awakened, so his general knowledge structure was much more solid than Luonan's. Today's environment is good and my state is good. If I can't even do this, it will be too hurtful. Juan Pagoda said, although the material nature doesn't conflict, it isn't the best point of focus. What? Papercut didn't understand. Luonan understood. Dean Juan means that the condensation ring itself isn't too compatible with the nature of Worker Zhai's ability. You're talking about mutual promotion and restraint. Papercut and Gao Tianxia had a good relationship. They had been together for a long time, so Papercut was a bit affected. This description had a very traditional flavor to it. Juan Pagoda actually expressed his approval. It doesn't matter if it's metal, wood, water, fire, earth, or electromagnetism, heat, and other forms of expression. They are all just entry-level steps that lead to the ultimate material nature. However, everyone's temperament is different and their sensitivity is different. Their directions should be different as well. Old Shai's ability is electron affinity. Could it be that he needs the condensation ring? Papercut cracked a joke that wasn't really a joke. Her Majesty Empress Wu probably doesn't have any in stock. Actually, everyone understood that controlling water molecules and controlling electrons was not something that someone at Worker Zhai's level could reach. When all was said and done, this ring and that ring were just handrails. They needed a relatively stable support in the material world, allowing the illusory soul strength to function and multiply. Hearing their discussion, Di Weiwu, who had been listening to the heavenly book all this time, suddenly sighed with emotion. The mental side is so troublesome. I'll just read scriptures with the dean. Hey Raywan. What's your ability? That's right. This little mischievous fellow was sighing with emotion because he wanted to strike up a conversation with Ruiwen. He wanted to probe her background. A new person had entered the orphanage without rhyme or reason. She was older than them by a head and she was a backdoor entrant. He couldn't help but be curious. Unfortunately, Ruiwen remained silent. She just stood quietly by Luonan's side. Luonan wasn't interested in children's tricks. He observed Worker Zhai's work from a close distance during the course of their conversation. He came to a preliminary conclusion. Worker Zhai's work was much more meticulous than his when it came to the condensation ring. The overall structure outlined by Worker Zhai's soul strength manifested the rigor and precision of engineering drawings. Luo Nan could see that Worker Zhai's outline seemed to divide the condensation ring's structure into many fulcrums and boundaries. Worker Zhai broke it down into blocks and steps that could be pieced together. Luo Nan was enlightened as he watched for a long time. He gained a deeper understanding of the subtle details of the interference between the mental and the material. This method was undoubtedly the most labor-saving and optimal solution. But behind the precision was an unsustainable predicament. Luo Nan would probably never be able to experience this sort of feeling. Luo Nan admired Worker Zhai's meticulousness, but the situation was different now. It would be too much of a waste of an opportunity. He thought for a moment and silently stepped forward. He abruptly bumped into Worker Zhai, interrupting Worker Zhai's state of oblivion. Worker Zhai was stunned for a moment. He turned his head to look and saw Luo Nan simply sit on the ground, ignoring the dampness. He took out the split-page notebook that rarely left his side and turned on the flexible e-ink screen and drawing software. Rays of light shot out and diffused outwards, reaching the boundaries of the notebook. Luo Nan chose the rarely used three-dimensional drawing mode. He didn't hesitate at all. He simply put his pen to paper in the work area. The structure of the condensation ring was like a smooth donut. The center was empty and the overall rules weren't complicated. However, this sort of three-dimensional curved structure was extremely difficult to draw by hand, compared to forming it with one's thoughts. Smooth lines required considerable professional skill. Luo Nan and Worker Zhai both had this. Worker Zhai could see that Luo Nan's composition lines and so on were beautiful, but they weren't particularly precise. They were more like freehand strokes. It was undeniable that this method was exceptionally smooth. Soon the projection area was filled with over a dozen similar structures. Luo Nan even turned on the animation effects, causing these donuts to flip back and forth. Then Luo Nan crooked his finger at Di Weiwu. Come Weiwu. I'll show you a magic trick. Blow on these donuts. They'll be a surprise. Are you trying to coax a child? If you don't come, I'll have your sister Ruiwen blow. Hey, a sister? Di Weiwu was shocked. This was a situation he never imagined. He instinctively looked at Ruiwen's chest. Luo Nan flicked a raindrop with his finger and it hit Di Weiwu on the forehead. Are you going to blow or not? Blow. Watch me blow your cowhide off. Even though Luo Nan said this, Di Weiwu still moved forward with great interest. He puffed his cheeks and fiercely blew on the painting area. It was at this moment that the dozen or so donuts in the work area seemed to be brushed by the airflow. They floated out from the bound light of the work area. They seemed to be stained with special light powder, and they transformed into glowing bubbles that changed shape and scattered outwards. Wow, this is cool. Di Weiwu praised loudly. He was completely unaware of the difficulty of producing a similar scene. Luo Nan's method was inspired by the Order of Justice. Back then, the Order of Justice had used a projector to construct the structure of the sacred space. There was also the Myriad Towers. They had used a similar method to test Xie Junping and Du Yong's attainments in the mystic arts. Compared to the projector array, Luo Nan's method embodied the interference effect of soul strength turning the void into reality. His method of using interference strength to draw in light was even more breathtaking. Of course, the magic trick was just a gimmick. The true value of this method was revealed later. The glowing bubbles rapidly shrank at a visible rate. A small portion of them collapsed due to structural instability, but most of them shrunk to the point where it was hard to see with the naked eye. This was because the work area of the flexible screen was loaded with the glimmering energy of the glimmering screen. It released rays of light that were like the eye of a needle. 2 seconds later, these rays of light transformed into resplendent pearl-like light. This was because the structure of the condensation rings had successfully gathered water molecules. The water droplets refracted light.